Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into a city that once ruled seas, gold markets, and imaginations long before cheap pizza slices and cruise ships clogged its canals. You're not sitting in a gondola with a neon selfie stick in your hand tonight. You're drifting back, way back, into a Venice that tourists never got to see. And yes, you probably won't survive this version either. The streets are wet, the walls are crumbling, and disease sometimes lurks closer than your shadow. But it's worth it, because this is where forgotten empire and forgotten dreams hide just out of reach. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know, drop a comment with your location and local time. There's something fun about imagining someone in Mumbai, someone in Toronto, and someone in a tiny village in Spain all listening together as the same story flows like the tide. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You close your eyes, and the sound of water lapping at wood takes over. Venice doesn't arrive with a bang. It seeps into your senses like salt in the air. You imagine yourself floating between half-submerged stone walls, where windows lean crookedly as if centuries of secrets have weighed them down. This isn't the Venice of overpriced espresso and carnival masks sold for €10 on a side street. This is a living, breathing risk. A city built where no sane builder would dare to lay brick. Historians still argue whether the first Venetians were just stubborn survivors or visionary engineers. The fact is simple. The place where you're drifting was once marshland, mosquito heaven, and tidal chaos. Settling here in the 5th century, refugees from the mainland ran away from invading Lombards and Huns, dragging their belongings into these lagoons. The quirky tidbit? Early huts were lashed together with fishing nets and propped up on driftwood. Imagine moving into a new apartment where your landlord says, "By the way, the foundation is fish bones and prayer." And yet, here you are, centuries later, floating past evidence that those prayers somehow worked. You glide beneath an arch where torchlight once flickered, reflecting golden ripples across a ceiling blackened with centuries of smoke. You wonder about the people who leaned out of those windows. Women pouring out chamber pots at dawn, merchants shouting prices down to the boats, children dangling their bare feet dangerously close to the water. A gondolier hums under his breath, not the cheesy baritone of serenade, but a tired tune learned from his father, who learned it from his father. His oar dips rhythmically, and every splash feels like a heartbeat. It's slower than you expect, heavier, as though the water itself remembers wars and weddings, betrayals and blessings. Venice was never about power in the loud sense. Rome built walls, France flaunted kings, Venice whispered. It wrapped its power in ceremony, commerce, and subtle tricks. You think about the winged lion, the city's chosen mascot. It isn't snarling like a real lion would. No, it's holding a book, sometimes a sword, sometimes both. This isn't raw violence. It's calculated authority. Calm, confident, but ready to swipe when provoked. Here's your mainstream fact. By the year 1000, Venice controlled trade routes stretching from the Adriatic deep into the Mediterranean. Spices, silks, even strange animals, all filtered through these canals before ending up in European markets. A French knight might never step foot in Venice, but the saffron in his dinner and the glass goblet in his hand both passed through here. And you can't help smiling at one of Venice's proudest inventions, glass so clear it was nearly invisible. Venetian artisans guarded their recipe like modern tech giants guard their algorithms. Rumor says if a glassblower tried to leave Venice with his skills, assassins might follow. Imagine quitting your job only to find HR waiting with daggers. You lean into the thought that Venice is less a city and more a conspiracy that somehow survived for over a millennium. Even scholars shrug sometimes. Was it geography? Was it cunning diplomacy? Was it dumb luck? The lagoon's shallow waters kept invaders' heavy ships away, sure, but so did the thick web of bribes and treaties. Historians still argue whether Venice thrived because it mastered neutrality or because it disguised aggression as neutrality. Either way, while Europe bled in endless wars, Venice stacked ducats like poker chips. The gondola drifts closer to a crumbling palazzo. Its marble columns glow faintly under the moonlight, veins in the stone like sleepy rivers. Inside, you imagine a banquet centuries ago. Roasted fish, laughter echoing through candle smoke, a whispered deal made in a corner. Now the hall is empty, windows broken, only shadows feasting. Time in Venice is a layered painting. Peel one surface and another waits underneath, just as vivid, just as fragile. You find yourself wondering what the city smells like right now. Not the fried dough and diesel fumes of modern Venice, but a stew of salt, tar, and garlic. Sailors haul ropes slick with brine. Bakers pull bread from ovens at dawn. Fishermen dump their catch where cats slink impatiently. It isn't glamorous, but it's alive in a way that sterile glass-fronted tourist shops can never be. The gondolier slows his stroke, and for a moment, everything stills. Water, stone, moonlight. That's all there is. The silence isn't empty. It's heavy with centuries, like someone is about to lean out from a dark window and tell you a secret. You exhale. The journey is just beginning. The gondola sways, and you lean into the sound of water against wood. The air smells faintly of salt and something older, almost medicinal, like marsh plants bruised under your feet. This is where Venice began, not with gold palaces or painted ceilings, but with fear. You picture yourself centuries back, the mainland burning behind you, raiders pouring across Italy like ants, and you, clutching whatever scraps of life you can carry, stumbling out into the shallow lagoon. There's nothing heroic about the beginning. Refugees don't think of glory. They think of survival. The lagoon is messy, unpredictable, filled with mudflats, reeds, and shifting sandbars. You wade in knee-deep, praying the ground beneath doesn't vanish. A wooden cartwheel sinks, a goat bleats miserably, and your uncle curses because he's lost half his grain sacks to the water. And yet, for all its inconvenience, the lagoon offers one gift: protection. Heavy armies can't march through it. Horses sink, catapults rot. Invaders glance at the endless wetland and mutter, "Not worth it." Historians still argue whether the earliest Venetians truly planned to settle here permanently or if they expected to return once the mainland was safe. Some think it was meant to be a temporary hideout, but temporary huts became villages, and villages stitched themselves into something larger. What began as fear calcified into identity. You trudge along planks laid across soggy ground. Families balance on them like circus performers, carrying bundles of clothes, relics from churches, and a few chickens that seem more annoyed than grateful. The quirky tidbit? One chronicler claimed people even lashed boats together to form floating neighborhoods when the mud was too unstable. Picture that. An entire street bobbing up and down, your neighbor's laundry swaying with the tide. If you complain about noisy upstairs neighbors today, at least their floor isn't literally floating above your head. The first homes are crude, wood piled on brush, straw roofs leaking with every rain, and walls leaning like drunkards. But slowly, innovation creeps in. Men drive sharpened wooden stakes into the mud, hundreds of them, until the marsh begins to harden under a forest of submerged piles. You crouch, imagining your own feet driving those posts endlessly, rhythm echoing across the water. It seems impossible, but those foundations remain even today, hidden under marble and stone. Beneath every grand palace, tourists snap selfies in front of. There are millions of drowned tree trunks, sacrificed to hold up dreams. And then comes the sea, not as an enemy, but as a partner. You can't farm easily here. Soil is too thin. Salt seeps into everything. But water? Water becomes wealth. Fishing, salt harvesting, and above all, trade. You row small boats across narrow channels, barter with nearby settlements, and slowly realize something. The very isolation that once felt like exile has become security. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 6th century, these lagoon settlements were already forming a loose confederation, tied together by necessity. They paid tribute to Byzantine overlords who ruled from distant Constantinople. But in exchange, they gained a shield against Lombard warriors stomping through northern Italy. The lagoon's awkward geography became not a curse, but a moat. You glance around in your drifting imagination. The world here is noisy but fragile. Hammers striking wood, women shouting in dialects that sound like Venetian Italian in embryo, and bells chiming faintly from makeshift churches. At night, the marsh croaks with frogs and swarms with mosquitoes. You scratch your arm, suddenly grateful for modern mosquito spray, though back then they would have burned herbs, or sometimes just lived with the itch until they forgot. Venice's birth is not a romantic painting. It's a gamble, one that could have failed 100 different ways. Flood, famine, disease, or simple despair. Yet the people stayed. Fear became habit. Habit became resilience. And resilience, as you feel it now, is the slow heartbeat of an empire. Scholars sometimes debate whether calling Venice born of fear oversimplifies things. After all, weren't there also ambitions, clever planning, and a desire for independence? Maybe. But fear was the spark. Without that raw instinct to flee, no one would have bothered hammering piles into mud or hauling their lives into a swamp. It's like building a fortress out of quicksand. You'd only try if you were desperate enough. You imagine yourself standing at the edge of the lagoon at sunset. The water glows orange, the reeds sway, and smoke from mainland villages curls on the horizon. You take a deep breath, tasting salt and ash, and you know the choice. Go back to burning cities or stay in this watery nowhere. Most chose to stay, and in staying, they planted seeds not in soil, but in determination. A child splashes near you, chasing a crab across the shallows. His mother scolds him, worried he'll slip into a deeper channel. You smile. Even here, even now, life insists on itself. Markets form, songs spread. Fishermen argue about prices. Priests argue about doctrine. Fear begins to weave into something strangely hopeful. Later, you watch as a man carves a small lion symbol into wood, barely more than a doodle. He scratches it carefully, as though claiming protection. It doesn't mean much yet, but someday, that lion will roar across seas, carved into banners and coins. For now, it's just a scared man scratching hope into timber. You close your eyes and hear the lagoon whisper. It isn't silence, it's promise. You may be afraid, but fear is also focus. Every ripple around your ankles says build, adapt, survive, and somehow you do. The lagoon quiets for a moment, and you sense the change. Fear has settled into roots, but now those roots are asking a bigger question. Who's in charge here? Refugees can survive for a few months without much structure, but a whole city rising from the marsh can't run on arguments and wishful thinking. You picture yourself in a crowd, knee-deep in water that smells of seaweed and wood smoke, as men debate loudly on a crude platform. Who will lead? Should you beg for a king from the mainland? Should you pledge to some duke for protection? Or maybe, just maybe, you invent something different. The decision that slowly emerges is radical for its time. Venice doesn't crown a king. No one man will inherit the right to rule because of bloodline or divine right. Instead, the city begins to shape itself as a republic. That word feels fragile in your ear, like an experiment whispered in the dark. And yet here it is, a city deciding that power should be chosen, not inherited. Historians still argue whether this was born out of lofty ideals or just Venetian stubbornness. Some suggest it was simply practical. The lagoon settlements were too fragmented, too diverse, for one family to dominate. Others claim it was a deliberate rebellion against the chaos of monarchies around them. Whatever the truth, you sense the moment crackle, like kindling catching flame. At first, the system is messy. Leaders, called tribunes, are chosen from different communities. But imagine trying to run a growing city with a dozen squabbling bosses, each loyal to their own little island. It's like watching 12 captains steer one boat. You already know it's going to crash. The quirky tidbit? Some sources claim fistfights actually broke out during these early councils, and more than once, a debate was resolved by tossing a troublemaker into the lagoon. Nothing says democracy like a wet tunic. Eventually, compromise wins. The tribunes are replaced by a single figure, the Doge, short for dux, meaning leader. But here's the twist. The Doge isn't a king. He's elected, supposedly for life, but under tight restrictions. You imagine yourself watching the first Doge, Paolo Lucio Anafesto. If he even truly existed, since historians still debate that detail, standing stiffly while men murmur behind him, already plotting how to limit his authority. Venice creates a ruler who wears a crown, but is trapped in a web of councils and checks. He can't pass power to his son, can't marry off his daughter for dynastic gain, and sometimes can't even leave his palace without permission. It feels contradictory, a leader both honored and imprisoned. And yet in this contradiction lies the genius of Venice. By refusing to let one man dominate, they avoid the messy assassinations and coups that tear other states apart. Power in Venice becomes a performance. Grand robes, processions, speeches, but always under the watchful eyes of councils, votes, and traditions. You drift past the Doge's palace in your mind. The marble gleams, soft pink and white like frozen dawn. But behind its arches you imagine cramped chambers where the real business is done. Councils scribble decisions, scribes record votes, and servants carry trays of wine to men debating trade agreements. There's no throne room glittering with gold, just rooms buzzing with paperwork. In Venice, bureaucracy is the real crown. Here's your mainstream fact. The Venetian Republic lasted for over 1,000 years, from its semi-mythical founding in the 8th century until Napoleon snuffed it out in 1797. No other medieval republic survived so long, not even mighty Florence. And it all began because a lagoon community decided kings weren't worth the trouble. As you picture this, you realize how strange it is. Europe at this time is full of castles, knights swearing oaths, and kings demanding taxes. Meanwhile, Venice is saying, "Thanks, but we'll elect our own." It's like discovering an early prototype of modern government hiding in the middle of the Middle Ages. The gondolier hums again, and you imagine him smirking at the thought. A king? He might scoff. Why should I bow to some spoiled prince when I can make my fortune hauling peppercorns? That's the Venetian spirit. Practical, mercantile, allergic to unnecessary pageantry. Well, unless pageantry makes money, then they're all in. The scholarly debate continues in your drifting thoughts. Was Venice really a republic? Or was it just an oligarchy dressed up in democratic clothes? After all, only wealthy families had true power. Elections were tangled webs of manipulation, with elaborate rules designed to prevent corruption, but also ensuring that outsiders never broke in. So, was it liberty, or was it just a clever illusion of liberty? You smile at the paradox. It's both. Venice thrives because people believe in the Republic, even if it's rigged. And sometimes, believing is enough. The quirky side note? Venice was so suspicious of monarchy that when a doge died, they would sometimes investigate his behavior posthumously. If they found he had abused power, they could strip his family of wealth or banish them, as if punishing the shadow of a ghost. Imagine dying at work, only for HR to show up at your funeral with a list of infractions. The gondola turns slowly, and you look up at balconies leaning over the water. You picture citizens watching processions below, the Doge in his distinctive horn-shaped cap, surrounded by banners and music. The crowd cheers, but not with the blind adoration given to kings. Instead, it's a knowing cheer, as if to say, "We'll let you wear the costume, but don't get any ideas." In the quiet that follows, you feel the rhythm of this strange republic. It's cautious, calculated, sometimes suffocating, but it works. Venice avoids the worst of feudal squabbles, sidesteps civil wars, and instead pours its energy into trade, diplomacy, and survival. While monarchs gamble on battlefield glory, Venice gambles on contracts, treaties, and coin. You close your eyes and hear the echo of votes being cast, papers being signed, laws being drafted. No swords clashing, no thrones trembling, just the slow, steady murmur of a republic deciding its own destiny. You find yourself drifting into the shadowy corridors of time, sailing eastward across the Adriatic, toward the glittering skyline of Constantinople. The great city rises like a jewel set against the horizon, its walls gleaming in the sun, domes shimmering above the sea, and the cross-topped spires of Hagia Sophia towering as if to remind every traveler that this was once the capital of Rome's eastern half. As you breathe in this scene, you remember. For centuries, Venice's fate was tied to Byzantium, as a servant first, but slowly, craftily, as a master of its fortunes. Imagine yourself as a Venetian merchant in the 11th century. You've sailed through treacherous waters, carrying salt, timber, and cloth, hoping to exchange them for silks, spices, and gold. Your ship creaks as you enter the Golden Horn, where Byzantine galleys patrol the waters with stern eyes. Here, the Venetians are not yet equals. They are supplicants. Their city survives at the whim of the Eastern Emperor, and every privilege, every trading right, is granted as a gift, not as a right. The Emperor, seated upon his throne of marble and gold, views the Venetians as useful but expendable tools. To him, they are skilled sailors, daring traders, and sharp diplomats, yet always outsiders. And so, early Venice bends its knee. Treaties are signed in which the Venetians swear loyalty to Byzantium, offering ships and soldiers in exchange for tax exemptions and trading quarters within the city's walls. You can almost hear the bustle of the Venetian quarter in Constantinople. Narrow alleys crammed with warehouses, the smell of spices mixing with the salty tang of the sea. At night, lanterns flicker on wooden beams, and merchants whisper deals in the dark. They are tolerated because they are useful, but you feel the tension in the air, the sense that these foreigners will never truly be trusted by their imperial hosts. Yet Venice plays the long game. You lie back and listen as the centuries shift around you. When the Byzantines need ships to fight Arab fleets, Venetian oarsmen answer the call. When the Normans threaten the empire's western provinces, Venetian galleys rush to defend the seas. In return, emperors grant ever greater privileges, reduced tariffs, special docks, even the right to rule themselves inside their quarter of Constantinople. Slowly, the balance begins to tip. You realize, with a quiet thrill, that the servant is becoming indispensable to the master. By the 12th century, Byzantine merchants are grumbling, for the Venetians dominate the harbors. Their ships, faster and more reliable, carry goods not just into Constantinople, but across the entire Mediterranean. What was once a favor has become a stranglehold. The empire cannot move grain, timber, or luxuries without Venetian sails. Close your eyes and hear the clamor of resentment. The Greeks mutter about arrogant Latins who flaunt their privileges, who refuse to pay duties, who walk Constantinople's streets as if the city were their own. And yet, the emperor cannot act against them. For every year the Venetians grow richer, stronger, more woven into the lifeblood of Byzantine trade. The turning point comes in a moment of weakness. The empire, battered by enemies and desperate for allies, renews Venetian privileges in sweeping terms. Imagine yourself reading those parchments. Whole regions of the empire's trade handed over, ports ceded, taxes abolished for Venetians. Byzantium has unwittingly signed away its economic independence. You can feel the change in the wind. Venice is no longer a servant. Venice is becoming the master. From its lagoon back home, the Doge watches the empire's decline with cautious patience, using Byzantium's weakness to expand Venetian influence. Venice's fleets now patrol the seas with the authority once reserved for imperial galleys. Its merchants dictate prices, its traders flood markets, its coins buy influence in palaces. But this long game is dangerous. As you drift deeper into the story, you sense the growing hostility. In Constantinople, riots break out. Venetian warehouses burned by mobs enraged at their dominance. The once favored allies are now resented overlords. Tensions spiral until, in a fit of fury, the Byzantines arrest and massacre Venetian merchants. It is a shocking rupture, and for a moment you feel the city tremble under your feet. But Venice is not undone. Patiently, strategically, it waits, weaving alliances, biding time. This conflict, you realize, is only the beginning. What started as a humble servant's bow before Byzantium will end one day in conquest. The seeds of the Fourth Crusade, when Venice will strike directly at the heart of the empire, are already being planted in these uneasy years. You breathe deeply, the weight of centuries pressing on your chest. The lesson of this chapter is clear. Empires can fall not only by the sword, but by the coin. Venice, small and fragile, learned to bend and serve until the moment it could rise and command. It is a story of patience, cunning, and ambition. The story of a servant who, over generations, became the master of its old imperial patron. As the scene fades, you hear the quiet lapping of water against wooden piers, the faint echo of merchants haggling under torchlight, and the deep toll of a bell across the lagoon. You drift further into rest, carrying with you the memory of a city that played the longest of games and won. You feel the waters of time ripple again, carrying you back across the lagoon, where the sun sets in glowing gold over Venice's skyline. The silhouette of domes and bell towers stretches against the evening sky. But one symbol towers above all: the winged lion, standing proud upon columns and banners, its paw resting upon an open book. This is not just an emblem. It is a story of faith, of daring theft, and of destiny. Imagine the 9th century, when Venice was still fragile, a cluster of islands caught between empires. To the east, the mighty Byzantines demanded loyalty. To the west, the rising Carolingians claimed dominion. Venice, small and vulnerable, needed not only trade, but a symbol of divine protection, something to set it apart, something to anchor its independence. And so the Venetians looked south, toward Alexandria in Egypt, where the relics of Saint Mark the Evangelist were kept. Mark, tradition said, had once preached in the lagoons, blessing the place where Venice would one day rise. To bring him home, to claim him as their patron, would be to declare that Venice was not a servant to emperors or kings, but a city chosen by God himself. You can picture the daring scheme. 2 Venetian merchants, Buono da Malamocco and Rustico da Torcello, set sail under cover of trade. They arrive in Alexandria, where Christian relics lie under the watchful eyes of Muslim rulers. Inside the great church, the body of Saint Mark rests. The merchants, with cunning whispers, persuade the local keepers to allow them to carry the relic away. But how to smuggle a saint past the guards? The story unfolds like a cloak and dagger tale. The Venetians wrap the saint's body in layers of cloth, then hide it beneath slabs of pork, a cargo that Muslim officials, unwilling to touch, refuse to search. As the ship departs, the relics are carried across the Mediterranean, hidden beneath the scent of salted meat and spice. Now, close your eyes and imagine the moment of arrival. The bells of Venice toll in triumph. Crowds gather on the wharves, chanting prayers, their voices echoing over the lagoon. The relic of Saint Mark has come home. No longer is Venice simply another trading outpost. With Saint Mark as its protector, Venice claims its own destiny. The Doge himself kneels before the relic, and from this moment onward, the Lion of Saint Mark will roar as the city's eternal guardian. The new basilica rises on the Piazza San Marco, its domes glittering with mosaics, its walls encrusted with stolen marbles from distant lands. Step inside, and you feel the hush of incense, the glow of golden light across tessellated walls. Scenes of Christ and saints shimmering as if the very heavens lean down to touch the lagoon. At the center lies Saint Mark, the heart of Venice's faith and identity. The lion symbol spreads everywhere, on flags, on seals, on stone columns overlooking the sea. It gazes with wings outstretched, a lion holding an open book when the city is at peace, and a lion with sword drawn when the city goes to war. This symbol becomes more than religion. It becomes politics, law, and power. To see the lion was to know Venice claimed divine sanction, a city chosen to rule both land and sea. You drift with the story into later centuries, when merchants sail under banners painted with the Lion of Saint Mark. To foreign ports, it is a warning. These ships are under the protection of heaven. To Venetian citizens, it is reassurance. The saint watches, even as the Republic stretches across the seas. But the story is not only triumph. With symbols come burdens. The Venetians must constantly prove themselves worthy of their saint. Each festival, each ritual, each triumphal procession reminds the people that they are not just merchants, but guardians of a divine gift. On the Feast of St. Mark, the piazza erupts with pageantry. Banners flutter, bells ring, and the Doge himself parades before the crowd, reminding all that Venice's destiny is bound to its holy protector. And so, as you lie back and listen, you realize what began as a daring theft in Alexandria became the soul of a republic. The saint and the lion are more than a story. They are the heartbeat of Venice, a symbol carried through centuries of empire, a whisper of faith behind every merchant's gamble and every soldier's battle. The lagoon laps quietly, and you hear the echo of a lion's roar, soft, distant, eternal, reminding you that some symbols outlive even the greatest of empires. You glide forward in time, the waters of the lagoon carrying you toward a place where the air is thick with hammering, smoke, and salt. Ahead looms a walled compound, its gates crowned with statues and lions, its towers standing watch like silent guardians. This is the Arsenal of Venice, the beating industrial heart of the Republic, the place where ships are born, not one by one in a leisurely rhythm, but in a torrent, like soldiers marching out of a dream. Step through the gates in your mind, and the noise envelops you. The clang of iron rivets, the rasp of saws against timber, the creak of cranes lifting masts. It feels almost overwhelming. Yet here, in this chaos, there is order. Venetian organization hums like a hidden engine. Workers don't build ships from start to finish. Instead, each carpenter, caulker, rope maker, and blacksmith handles one task, passing their piece down the line. You are walking inside the world's first great assembly line, centuries before Henry Ford was even born. Picture the sight. Galleys taking shape row by row, ribs of oak arching like the skeletons of giant beasts, tar bubbling in vats, sails drying in the lagoon breeze. Rope coils into endless bundles, anchors cool in sand after being dragged red hot from forges. Thousands of men labor here, some free, some bonded, all moving to the rhythm of a city that cannot survive without the sea. Historians still argue whether Venice could truly launch a fully armed galley in a single day, but the legend is strong and the numbers staggering. At its peak, the arsenal employed 16,000 workers and covered nearly a 15th of the city's space. Imagine that. An entire neighborhood given over to the forging of war, the smell of pine resin and sweat lingering on every gust of wind. Yet the arsenal is not only about speed, it is about control. Every nail, every plank, every bolt of sailcloth is measured by the state, ensuring uniformity. Standardized parts, a concept so modern it almost feels out of place, allow galleys to be repaired quickly at sea. You picture yourself watching foremen tallying supplies on wax tablets, their hands blackened by soot, as they call out orders to teams that know their craft by instinct. And Venice's enemies know this efficiency too. Rival powers, from Genoa to the Ottomans, fear the arsenal because it means Venice can recover from losses faster than anyone else. A battle may sink 10 galleys today, but within weeks, replacements glide down the arsenal's ramps, oars already fitted, cannon already mounted, sailors already waiting to take command. Still, the arsenal is more than war. It is a city within a city, a place where workers' songs echo over the water, where rumors drift faster than smoke, where apprentices learn trades that pass through families like heirlooms. Some whisper of secret projects here. Experimental ships with multiple decks of oars, armored hulls, strange contraptions that vanish as quickly as they appear. Venice guards these secrets jealously, punishing spies with swift and silent justice. And in the quiet moments, when the forge fires burn low, you can imagine the workers gazing out at the lagoon, knowing they are building not just ships, but the very bones of empire. Each galley that sails from these docks carries Venice's pride, Venice's fear, Venice's ambition. They may never leave their island home, yet through their labor, the arsenal's men shape the destiny of the Mediterranean. You pause, hearing the steady slap of water against hulls under construction, the distant calls of gulls circling above. The arsenal is alive, a creature of wood and fire, breathing in resources from across the world and breathing out fleets that make Venice master of the seas. And as you drift toward sleep, you realize this great machine is not just about ships. It is about imagination, about daring to bend chaos into order, about believing that a small city in a marsh could command empires by sheer force of organization. In every creak of timber and every splash of pitch, you hear not just labor, but destiny echoing across centuries. The lagoon shimmers again, and you drift into a world of ritual and ceremony. You hear bells ringing across Venice, not the frantic clang of alarm, but the slow, measured toll of festival. The Piazza San Marco fills with a tide of people, merchants in rich robes, sailors with salt still in their beards, noble women with jeweled veils, beggars pressed into the crowd, each straining for a glimpse of what is to come. It is Ascension Day, the day Venice proclaims to the world her eternal bond with the sea. At the center of it all stands the Doge, clad in ceremonial robes of gold and crimson, his horn-shaped cap gleaming like a crown, though it is not quite one. He steps onto a grand vessel, the Bucentaur, part galley, part floating palace, adorned with gilded carvings and bright banners. You can almost hear the creak of oars, the flap of silken standards, the murmur of anticipation as the ship glides from the quay into open water. The wedding of the sea is no mere festival. It is a declaration. Venice depends on the sea for everything: wealth, food, safety, identity. And so, year after year, the Doge sails forth to wed the sea as if it were a living bride, sealing the union of city and water in a ceremony both political and mystical. Close your eyes and picture the moment. The Doge stands at the prow, waves shimmering below him. A gold ring gleams in his hand, heavy with meaning. He raises it high, and the crowd hushes. Then, with a gesture both simple and eternal, he casts it into the waters of the Adriatic, declaring, "We wed thee, sea, in token of our true and perpetual dominion." The words carry across the waves, echoed by priests, dignitaries, sailors, and the common folk alike. The Adriatic is not just a body of water. It is a spouse, a partner, a treasure chest, and a battlefield. By this ritual, Venice claims not only to live with the sea, but to rule it. Historians still argue whether the ceremony began as a thanksgiving for naval victory, or as a shrewd piece of propaganda. But for Venetians, the meaning is clear. Each year, when the Doge throws the ring, the city renews its vows. And each year, the sea accepts, as if bowing to the Republic's mastery. You drift closer, and you hear music swell from the Bucentaur, horns, strings, and drums blending with the cry of gulls and the slap of waves against the hull. Around the Doge's vessel, other ships follow, their decks packed with citizens cheering, tossing flowers, waving banners. The lagoon itself seems to glitter brighter, as if the water shares in the celebration. And yet, there is an undercurrent. The festival is joyous, but it is also a reminder of fragility. Venice cannot exist without the sea. Too much storm, and the islands drown. Too little trade, and the markets wither. To wed the sea is to promise fidelity to something both generous and dangerous. The Adriatic can bring wealth in the form of spice fleets and silk caravans, but it can also deliver storms, pirates, and plague. As you listen, lulled by the rhythm of oars dipping in unison, you realize the beauty of this pageantry. Venice does not merely live beside the sea. It lives within it, rising and falling with its moods. The wedding ring is not just jewelry. It is insurance, prayer, spectacle, and declaration all at once. The Doge lowers his hand, the ring gone beneath the waves, and the crowd erupts into cheers. The Bucentaur turns back toward the city, its gilded sides catching the sunlight, its wake shimmering like liquid gold. Behind it, the sea closes over the ring, silent, eternal, as if sealing the pact anew. And for one drowsy, dreamlike moment, you sense that the lagoon itself smiles. For Venice and the sea are bound together, not for a day, not for a season, but for as long as the bells of San Marco ring over the waters. The lagoon grows quiet again, the festival fading into echoes. Now the air shifts, heavier, sharper, as though destiny itself is drawing you toward a single man, one whose name will linger in Venetian memory like the clang of a great bell. His name is Enrico Dandolo, and though his body is frail and his eyes clouded with blindness, his spirit burns with fire enough to shake empires. You find him in the Doge's palace, leaning upon his staff, his face lined like an old map, his gaze sightless but unyielding. Most men his age retreat into prayer and silence. Dandolo, nearing 90, does the opposite. He steps into the heart of the world's greatest gamble, the Fourth Crusade. Picture the year 1201. Princes and knights from across Europe arrive in Venice, pledging to free Jerusalem. But crusades are not fought with piety alone. They need ships, provisions, fleets, and no one builds ships like the Venetians. The Doge agrees. Venice will supply transport for tens of thousands of crusaders if the price is paid. But soon the problem surfaces. The crusaders cannot meet the cost. They have faith and swords, but their coffers are thin. Most rulers would shrug, cut losses, send the foreigners home. Dandolo does something bolder, stranger. He offers a bargain. If the crusaders cannot pay in coin, they will pay in service. Together they will strike a Venetian enemy, the city of Zara on the Dalmatian coast, a Christian city, but rebellious under Hungarian sway. Imagine the scene as Venetian galleys, their sails taut with Adriatic winds, glide toward Zara. The crusaders hesitate, muttering about attacking fellow Christians. But Dandolo, old and blind, stands on deck, his voice cutting across the harbor. His words are not those of a priest, but of a commander who knows that Venice's destiny lies not in Jerusalem, but in control of trade routes. The assault begins, the city falls, and Venice has flexed its muscle. But Dandolo is not finished. He persuades the crusade to turn again, this time toward the glittering prize of Constantinople itself. Byzantium, ancient and mighty, has fallen into civil strife, and one claimant promises gold and loyalty if the crusaders restore him to the throne. The Venetians agree, not out of faith, but out of calculation. Constantinople is the key to the Eastern trade. Whoever controls it controls wealth beyond measure. And so, the blind Doge leads armies not toward Jerusalem, but against the greatest Christian city in the world. Historians still argue whether Dandolo intended this all along, or whether events simply carried him forward like a current. What is certain is the outcome. In 1204, the Crusaders breach the walls of Constantinople. The city falls to fire, looting, and chaos. Treasures are carted back to Venice, bronze horses that will stand upon San Marco's facade, relics and jewels that will dazzle worshippers for centuries. In the midst of it all, imagine Dandolo himself. Blind, yes, but seated upon the throne of conquest, directing negotiations. His very presence a reminder that Venice has transformed from servant to master. The Byzantine Empire is broken, its fragments parceled out, and Venice takes her share. Islands, ports, colonies across the Aegean. From this gamble, an empire is born. And yet, in the quiet spaces of the story, you feel the cost. Constantinople's fall marks a wound in Christendom, a betrayal that will never heal. The crusade that began as holy mission ends as Venetian triumph and scandal. But for Dandolo, who dies in Constantinople shortly after, there is no regret. His body is laid to rest in Hagia Sophia, the heart of the city he conquered, though centuries later his tomb will be destroyed. As the waters of time settle, you sense his legacy like a shadow over the lagoon. Venice has gambled everything, faith, reputation, honor, and won an empire. The blind Doge's gamble reshaped not only Venice, but the world. And as you let the story sink in, you cannot help but marvel that a man who could not see with his eyes could see so clearly with his ambition. You drift forward through time, the lagoon's gentle lap carrying you toward a city whose walls seem to scrape the sky. Constantinople, the queen of cities. You imagine the gleaming marble of its palaces, the domes of Hagia Sophia glinting gold under a low sun, and the harbor bustling with ships from every corner of the Mediterranean. For centuries, it has been the jewel of the East, a city that commands trade, culture, and religion alike. And yet, here comes Venice, no longer a humble servant, but a power with patience, cunning, and ambition enough to challenge the greatest city in the known world. Picture yourself as a Venetian commander in 1203. The Fourth Crusade has been diverted, but this is not chaos. It is opportunity. You stand on a deck of a galley, the wind whipping your hair, the sails catching the Adriatic's breath. The Doge's plan is audacious, controversial, and dangerous. The Crusaders, bound by debt and Venetian contracts, will turn their force against Constantinople itself. The city seems impenetrable from the water, its walls taller than any fortress you've ever imagined, its moat filled with brackish water, its gates guarded by archers and soldiers. But Venice has learned the art of siege, the craft of patience. You can almost feel the anticipation, the quiet tension among the sailors, the nervous excitement of knights unsure whether their cause remains holy or has become merely practical. Historians still debate whether this diversion toward Constantinople was a calculated Venetian coup or an unintended consequence of Crusader debt. But standing there, amid the rows of galleys, the strategy is clear. Venice sees the prize not as a conquest of land alone, but as a victory over trade itself. Control of the Byzantine ports, markets, and riches that have flowed through this city for centuries. Imagine the first assault. The Venetian galleys slide silently through the Golden Horn, chains dragged across the water to block the harbor from Byzantine reinforcements. Towers loom overhead, archers ready, but Venetian catapults rain stones, arrows, and fire. Chaos erupts. Streets you imagined peaceful now roar with shouts, clanging armor, and terrified citizens fleeing before the tide of battle. The Queen of Cities falls not in a single strike, but in waves. Looters pour into palaces, temples, and merchant quarters. Bronze horses, treasures of emperors, relics of saints, all are loaded onto Venetian ships destined for the lagoon. You picture each chest, each gilded artifact, crossing the sea with the rhythm of oars, each one a symbol of Venice's rising power. Yet the conquest is not merely about greed, it is about leverage. By controlling Constantinople, Venice secures trade routes to the east, dominates maritime commerce, and establishes itself as the true master of the Adriatic and Aegean. The city's fall marks a turning point, Venice's shift from regional power to empire. The streets of Constantinople, once bustling with Byzantine life, echo with silence after the chaos, while the Doge's envoys negotiate settlements, claiming islands, ports, and privileges as if divinely sanctioned. You sense the magnitude of this moment. Venice has gambled faith, reputation, and alliance, and yet, against all odds, emerges not just victorious, but transformed. And as you drift on the story, you see the Lion of St. Mark rise above the water, banners fluttering, symbols of power and divine favor, reminding the world that Venice is no longer a servant. She is a conqueror, a merchant empire, a master of both commerce and war. In the quiet after the storm, you feel the weight of history. The conquest of Constantinople is both triumph and tragedy, a reminder that the ambitions of a few can change the fate of 1,000 years. And through it all, Venice sails on, proud, calculating, and eternal. The lagoon's waters ripple beneath your imagination as you drift outward from Venice proper, beyond the familiar canals, past the Piazza San Marco, toward the wider Mediterranean. You are entering the realm of the Stato da Mar, Venice's maritime empire, a network of ports, islands, and fortified trading posts stretching from the Adriatic to the Aegean. Close your eyes and picture a map spread before you. Every dot a Venetian garrison, every harbor a hub of commerce, every island a jewel in a necklace of empire. You stand on the deck of a galley, oars slicing through the sapphire water, and realize that Venice is no longer just a city. It is a network, a system, a power that thrives on its dominion of the sea. Each port tells a story. Crete, a granary of grain; Corfu, a sentinel against pirates; Cyprus, a hub for spices, silks, and sugar; and dozens of smaller islands, each fortified, each loyal, each humming with Venetian energy. The empire is fragile, and you can almost feel the tension. Maintaining these far-flung holdings requires constant vigilance. Venetian governors, or rectors, keep watch over local populations, enforce laws, and ensure trade flows smoothly. You hear the murmur of debates among councils, the scribes recording taxes, tariffs, and shipments, the heartbeat of a maritime empire. Yet the Stato da Mar is more than bureaucracy. It is strategy. Each island and port functions as a piece in a chess game, controlling key sea lanes, blocking rivals, and protecting Venetian merchants. The network allows the city to dominate the eastern Mediterranean without ever having to control the hinterlands directly. You feel the brilliance of it. Venice, small in land, massive in influence. The scholarly debate drifts into your mind. Was this empire truly Venetian, or a loose collection of dependent ports held together by fear, diplomacy, and commerce? Historians argue whether Venice ruled these outposts through benevolence or coercion, but the effect is undeniable. The Stato da Mar secures the flow of wealth, sustains its navy, and extends Venetian influence far beyond the lagoon. Imagine arriving at one of these islands. Merchants unload crates of spices from Alexandria and textiles from Persia. Soldiers patrol the harbor, their armor glinting in the sun. Craftsmen work tirelessly, repairing ships, forging weapons, and ensuring the machinery of empire never stops. And everywhere, the winged Lion of St. Mark watches over the buildings, reminding locals and travelers alike that Venice claims sovereignty here. Quirky asides emerge in your imagination. Venetian administrators sometimes kept elaborate gardens, introducing flowers and herbs from distant lands to signal wealth and taste. In other ports, secret tunnels, hidden caches, and spy networks operated silently, ensuring no rival power could take advantage of a momentary lapse. Venice is both open and closed, welcoming trade while controlling every detail. And then, the long-term view settles over you. Over decades and centuries, the Stato da Mar becomes the backbone of Venetian power. It fuels commerce, finances fleets, and sustains culture. Without these distant holdings, Venice could never project influence beyond its lagoon. But with them, even the largest empires must reckon with a city smaller than many villages, yet commanding a maritime domain unmatched in scale and sophistication. You drift past harbors glowing in sunset, waves gently lapping against fortified walls, soldiers, sailors, merchants, and artisans, all part of a network that spans the Mediterranean, move in rhythm together, and you feel the steady pulse of Venice's empire. Here, in these ports and islands, the Republic thrives, adapts, and dominates, proving that true power can grow not from land, but from control of the sea. And as you close your eyes, lulled by the soft slap of waves against the galleys, you realize the lesson of the Stato da Mar. Venice's empire is not just conquest. It is organization, patience, and vision. Each port is a note in a symphony, each island a chord in a melody of trade and dominance, and the lagoon itself the steady conductor guiding it all. The waters of the Venetian lagoon shimmer gently as your imagination carries you far eastward, beyond the familiar Adriatic, past the Aegean, and across deserts and mountains that seem endless. You are embarking on a journey with a young Venetian merchant named Marco Polo, whose name will echo through centuries as both explorer and storyteller. Picture him standing on a wooden dock in Venice, laden with parchment, maps, and a sense of curiosity that feels almost dangerous in its ambition. It is the late 13th century, and Venice is thriving as a maritime power. But Marco wants more than trade. He wants the world itself. Imagine the excitement as he joins his father and uncle on a caravan, bound for the mysterious lands of the East, following routes few Europeans have ever traveled. Step into his shoes. The heat of desert sands under your sandals, the clatter of camels and horses, the rhythmic sway of caravans moving across mountain passes. Historians still argue how much of Marco Polo's story is fact and how much is embellished. Some claim he never left the Middle East. Others insist he walked every mile to the court of Kublai Khan. But as you drift through the story, you focus not on debate, but on experience. Imagine crossing the Pamir Mountains, the peaks so high they pierce clouds. Rivers roar beneath fragile wooden bridges. You smell spices, incense, and unfamiliar foods that you cannot name. At the court of Kublai Khan, Venice's young son of merchants becomes both guest and official. You can almost see him walking the palaces of Khanbalik, the vast capital, marveling at gardens, grand halls, and towers that seem to touch the sky. Polo describes gold-threaded robes, silks woven with dragons, and courtiers who bow in rituals he cannot fully comprehend. And yet, he adapts, recording, learning, and sending detailed reports of a world Europe barely understands. Imagine the marvel of Venetian readers when Marco returns home. He speaks of paper money, postal systems, coal, and inventions unknown to Venice. His tales are so vivid, so full of wonder, that people initially doubt them. But slowly, maps change. Merchants plan their voyages, and Europe begins to imagine trade with China and India as something more than fantasy. Venice itself becomes a bridge between East and West, a conduit for knowledge, commerce, and culture. Quirky details surface along the way. Polo recounts cities of glass, streets lined with silver, and bizarre animals that seem almost mythic. You feel the thrill of discovery, the shiver of seeing new worlds, and the way these tales inspire generations to think beyond the lagoon's calm waters. Yet the story is not only adventure. Marco Polo embodies Venice's spirit, curiosity, boldness, and a relentless drive to connect with the world. He is both product and ambassador of a republic whose influence stretches across oceans, who trades not only goods but ideas, and who understands that knowledge itself can be a kind of currency. As you drift on the rhythm of this story, you feel the pull of distant lands, the creak of caravans, the shimmer of silk and spices, and the distant bells of Venice calling him home. The lagoon seems smaller now, yet more connected, as if Marco Polo has woven the vastness of Asia into the heart of his city. And in the quiet lull of your mind, you realize that exploration is more than footsteps or sails. It is imagination, courage, and the desire to see what others cannot. Venice thrives because of people like him. People willing to cross deserts and seas, to write, to trade, to dream. The story of Marco Polo is a bridge, from servant to master, from lagoon to world, from curiosity to empire. The gentle rocking of your imagination carries you northward, away from distant Asia, back to the Adriatic, where Venice's mastery of the sea is about to face one of its greatest tests. Picture the year 1378. The Venetian Republic is powerful, wealthy, and proud, yet a rival looms in the form of Genoa, its perennial enemy. The two maritime republics have been dueling for decades, trading insults, goods, and fleets, but now conflict erupts with full fury in what will become the War of Chioggia. You find yourself standing on the deck of a Venetian galley, oars slicing through dark waters under a gray sky. The air is thick with salt, smoke, and tension. The enemy's fleet is visible on the horizon, their banners snapping in the wind. Genoa is clever, ambitious, and hungry to control trade routes Venice holds dear. You feel the nerves in every sailor around you, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and grim determination. Historians still argue whether Venice's victory was due to brilliant strategy or sheer luck. But from where you float above the waves, the story is electric. The battle begins at Chioggia, a tiny island at the southern end of the Venetian lagoon, and it seems small at first, almost inconsequential. But you sense that the outcome here will decide dominance of the Adriatic for decades. Imagine the combat. Galleys clash, the sound of wood smashing against wood echoing like thunder. Archers release volleys of arrows that hiss through the air. Fire floats drift across the water, threatening to set vessels ablaze. Every man knows that retreat is not an option. The fate of Venice itself hangs on these skirmishes. The genius of Venice lies in its organization. The arsenal has trained sailors and supplied ships like clockwork, each vessel moving in coordinated patterns, each cannon and ballista in precise position. Genoa, for all its skill, cannot match the rhythm, the discipline, or the sheer logistical might of the Venetian fleet. The tide begins to turn. Venetian forces surround the enemy, cutting off supply lines and trapping galleys in narrow channels. The chaos of battle contrasts sharply with the calm efficiency that has allowed Venice to build an empire across the sea. You sense a thrill, watching the enemy falter, their banners tattered, crews exhausted. Venice is not just surviving, it is asserting dominance, And yet, the War of Chioggia is more than military maneuvering. It is a psychological campaign. Genoa must realize that Venice is patient, persistent, and ruthless in defense of its trade. Citizens of Venice cheer from the shore, sending messages of encouragement to their sailors. Supplies arrive just in time, reinforcements glide across the lagoon, and morale never falters. Quirky details emerge. Some Venetian sailors used clever decoys, floating empty ships to mislead the enemy, while others spread rumors that the lagoon itself was cursed to aid Venice. You almost smile at the cleverness, the mixture of superstition and strategy that defines this republic. By the end of the conflict, Genoa is forced to sue for peace. Venice, bruised but triumphant, secures its control of the Adriatic and cements its reputation as the undisputed master of maritime trade. The lagoon seems to shimmer brighter, as if celebrating the city's resilience and cunning. And as you drift back into the gentle rocking of your imagination, you realize that the War of Chioggia is not just a tale of ships and soldiers. It is the story of Venice itself, small in land, immense in strategy, a city that has learned to defend its wealth and ambition against every rival that dares challenge it. The Adriatic has been claimed once more by the Lion of St. Mark. The lagoon glows softly as your imagination drifts eastward, along routes scented with cinnamon, pepper, and cloves. You are now in the heart of Venice's mercantile triumph, a city transformed into the crossroads of the known world. Picture merchants bustling through Rialto, their hands carrying bolts of silk from China, chests of spices from the Indies, and treasures plucked from ports across the Mediterranean. Venice is no longer simply a city-state. It is a kingdom of commerce, and its citizens are lords of wealth that flows like tides through the canals. Step into the shoes of a Venetian trader in the 14th century. You navigate narrow streets lined with warehouses, dodging carts carrying goods from Alexandria, Constantinople, and the Levant. Every shop is alive with chatter in dozens of languages: Greek, Arabic, Latin, and the Venetian dialect itself. You feel the pulse of the city, a heartbeat of trade, risk, and opportunity. As coins clink in counting houses, and contracts are signed with precise handshakes. Historians still argue how much of Venice's dominance was due to its maritime power versus sheer cunning in trade. But standing here, you sense it is both. The Navy protects routes, yes, but it is the skill of merchants, negotiating, calculating, and sometimes bluffing, that turns the city into an empire of profit. Picture the exotic cargo. Spices are the lifeblood of cuisine, medicine, and ceremony. Silk shimmers like liquid light, weaving threads that cover nobles in luxury, while dyes of indigo, vermilion, and gold make every cloth a masterpiece. Venice's traders control the flow of these goods, setting prices, shaping fashion, and subtly determining which cities rise in wealth and which fade into obscurity. The quirky details are irresistible. Venetian merchants sometimes smuggled rare goods in hollowed-out barrels or disguised shipments beneath mundane cargo to evade taxes or rivals. Some kept personal notebooks, recording the minutiae of distant markets, from the weight of peppercorns in Alexandria to the proper way to greet a sultan in Hormuz. The world seems vast, but Venice's merchants map it as if it were their own backyard, and the city itself thrives on this commerce. Buildings rise taller, streets grow busier, and the palaces of the wealthy line canals like sentinels of prosperity. Art, literature, and architecture bloom because of trade, and Venice's identity becomes inseparable from its role as mediator between East and West. You feel the scholarly debate shimmering in your mind. Was Venice an agent of cultural exchange or a clever manipulator of global supply chains? Perhaps it is both. Its merchants bring ideas, inventions, and knowledge alongside silk and spices, leaving an imprint on every port they touch. As you drift down the Grand Canal, lanterns reflecting on the water like scattered jewels, you realize that Venice is more than a city of merchants. It is a city of connections, ambition, and imagination. Each shipment, each contract, each voyage is a thread in a tapestry that stretches from the Adriatic to the farthest reaches of the known world. And as the sounds of the city fade into the gentle lap of the lagoon, you sense the power of Venice's lords of spice and silk. They do not wield swords or claim crowns, yet through trade, cunning, and vision, they command wealth and influence far beyond their small islands, shaping a world that is just beginning to glimpse the possibilities of globalization. The waters of the lagoon shimmer quietly as you drift back toward the mainland, leaving the bustling ports and exotic trade behind. Venice, long mistress of the seas, begins to cast its gaze inward, toward the fertile lands of the Veneto. Imagine the city's leaders, once consumed with maritime power and distant empires, realizing that the Republic's future may depend as much on soil and stone as on galleys and trade routes. Step into the 14th and 15th centuries, when Venetian patricians start acquiring estates on the mainland. You can picture the wide plains stretching under the horizon, fields of wheat and barley, vineyards ready to produce wine that will rival any in Europe. The move inland is pragmatic. The lagoon alone cannot sustain a growing population, nor can maritime trade guarantee food security. Venice begins to transform from a city-state of sailors into a territorial power with feudal ambition. Historians still debate whether this shift was inevitable or opportunistic. Some argue that Venetian expansion into the terra firma, the mainland, was a defensive strategy aimed at protecting trade routes and resources. Others claim it was sheer ambition, a desire to control every corridor connecting Venice to Italy's heartland. You float above fortified towns, seeing the Republic's banners draped across walls, asserting power without shedding unnecessary blood. Imagine a Venetian official arriving at a rural town, negotiating with local lords, offering protection in exchange for allegiance. You can almost hear the bustling markets of Padua and Vicenza, now under Venetian influence, their merchants learning the language of Venice, paying taxes, and sending their grain and wine back to the lagoon. Venice, once dependent on imports for survival, now commands a hinterland capable of feeding its growing population and sustaining its fleets. Quirky details emerge. Some patricians built lavish country villas, complete with gardens, fountains, and labyrinths, turning rural estates into retreats that display wealth and taste. Others introduced new agricultural techniques, importing seeds and livestock from distant lands, experimenting with irrigation and crop rotation to maximize output. You feel the pulse of innovation, a city bringing the ingenuity of trade and administration from islands to fields. The Republic also faces challenges. Maintaining control over the mainland requires garrisons, fortifications, and bureaucracy. Venetian law is extended, often clashing with local customs. Rebellions flare up occasionally, and administrators must balance diplomacy with force. Yet Venice's meticulous organization and patience allow it to absorb the terra firma into a stable, prosperous domain. Imagine yourself walking through one of these towns at dusk, the sky glowing amber. Farmers work the fields, children chase each other through cobblestone streets, and the distant bells of Venice echo faintly across the plains. It is a subtle, quieter empire than the one of spice and silk, but it is no less crucial. Here, Venice secures sustenance, loyalty, and the foundations of long-term power. And as you drift with the evening breeze, you realize the lesson. Venice's genius lies in adaptation. She was mistress of the sea, conqueror of cities, and trader of luxuries. But she also understood the value of land. By turning to the terra firma, Venice ensures her survival, balancing ambition with prudence, maritime power with agricultural security, and empire with sustainability. The Republic has learned to master both water and earth, crafting a legacy that will endure for centuries. The calm waters of the Venetian lagoon fade as your imagination drifts inland to a land of banners, steel, and ambition. You are now entering the age of the condottieri, mercenary captains whose names will echo in the courts and battlefields of northern Italy. Venice, once entirely reliant on its ships and sailors, has discovered that land power requires a different kind of mastery. Armies, strategy, and men willing to fight for coin rather than cause. Picture the scene. Rolling hills dotted with walled towns, each vying for dominance, each defending its borders. Venice, now a proud ruler of the terra firma, cannot simply rely on diplomacy alone. To protect its estates and expand influence, it hires condottieri, professional soldiers with reputations for brilliance, cunning, and sometimes ruthless pragmatism. You see them swaggering into town halls, swords strapped to their sides, confident that their reputation precedes them. Historians still argue whether reliance on condottieri was a strength or a weakness. Some say it allowed Venice to project power efficiently without draining its citizenry. Others warn that mercenaries are fickle. Loyalty is bought, not earned, and betrayal always lurks in shadow. You sense both truths as you watch contracts signed in lavish halls, wax seals pressed onto parchment, promising service for payment. Step closer. Imagine a condottiero leading a force of crossbowmen, pikemen, and cavalry across Venetian plains, the sun glinting off armor, the scent of horses and sweat thick in the air. Battles are swift and brutal. Towns change hands multiple times in a single campaign. Venice must coordinate strategy across a patchwork of mercenaries and citizen militias, ensuring that her estates remain secure while rivals are kept in check. Quirky details surface. Some condottieri maintain private chapels on campaign, dedicating small altars to saints they believe favor warfare. Others engage in bizarre rituals to boost morale, from elaborate feasts to theatrical war dances. You can almost hear the laughter and clanging swords echoing across the hills, mixing fear with spectacle, strategy with showmanship. Yet, Venice thrives in this age, not by brute force, but by calculation. The Republic uses contracts, intelligence, and diplomacy to turn the condottieri's ambitions toward Venetian benefit. Fortresses are reinforced, trade routes protected, and rival cities maneuvered into submission, often without a single battle. It is the art of control through the appearance of chaos. You drift through a quiet moment after a campaign. The condottieri rest, their armor dulled and their banners folded, while Venice's officials tally spoils, negotiate taxes, and plan the next move. This balance of mercenary daring and civic prudence ensures the Republic's continued dominance. And as the sun sets over the terra firma, painting fields and rivers with amber light, you sense the rhythm of Venice, a city of water, trade, and now land, orchestrating every move with foresight and discipline. The age of the condottieri is both thrilling and precarious, a time when strategy, loyalty, and ambition intersect, securing Venice's influence for generations. You feel a calm settle over the landscape, knowing that despite mercenaries' unpredictability, Venice's mastery of water, trade, and now land endures. The Republic has proven it can adapt, survive, and thrive, balancing bold gambles with patient calculation, shaping an empire that commands respect and awe. The lagoon grows quiet, the soft ripple of water carrying your thoughts toward Venice's most intimate emblem, the gondola. You drift along the narrow canals, imagining the sleek black vessels gliding silently beneath bridges, their reflections stretching and bending in the water like ink on parchment. It is not merely a boat, but the heartbeat of the city, a symbol of Venice itself, elegant, mysterious, and timeless. Picture yourself standing on a quiet canal at dawn. Mist curls over the water, and a lone gondola appears, prow cutting through the silver haze. The gondolier leans on his oar, guiding it with effortless precision, his figure mirrored in the still water. You notice the black hull, polished and gleaming, designed to appear understated yet commanding, a floating extension of the city's personality. The history drifts into view. Gondolas have existed for centuries, evolving from practical cargo vessels to ceremonial and personal boats. By the Renaissance, they carry nobility to the Doge's palace, merchants to Rialto, lovers through hidden waterways, and pilgrims to churches. Each curve of wood is crafted with care. Each decoration, the pharaoh at the prow, the painted interiors, is loaded with meaning. Historians still argue whether certain design elements are purely functional or intentionally symbolic, representing Venice's mastery over water and trade. Imagine the city watching itself through these boats. The black gondola mirrors Venice's elegance and its ability to navigate both literal canals and political currents. Quirky details emerge. Some gondoliers were rumored to carry small bells or secret compartments to smuggle messages, letters, or even contraband, blending practicality with subtle cunning. As you drift past bridges and palaces, the gondola becomes more than transportation. It is a rhythm, a meditation, a silent witness to centuries of triumph, plague, conquest, and festival. Its gliding motion lulls you, the soft slap of water against wood a calming counterpoint to the city's grandeur. And as the sun dips lower, painting the lagoon gold, you realize that Venice herself is mirrored in this black boat. Elegant, enduring, and mysterious. The gondola is a reminder that even amidst empires, conquests, and commerce, the city moves with grace, beauty, and a quiet, enduring soul. The lagoon grows solemn, the water reflecting the soft glow of lanterns along silent streets. You drift past palaces and churches, imagining Venice in the late Renaissance, a city of devotion, power, and hidden shadows. Here lies one of the city's darker yet fascinating facets, the Venetian Inquisition, a holy office that balanced faith, law, and control. It is a chapter of vigilance and quiet authority, not always visible but deeply woven into the fabric of the Republic. Picture the office tucked behind an unassuming facade, its walls lined with parchment, ledgers, and manuscripts. Officials move quietly, their robes rustling in candlelight, their faces masks of calm authority. They are clerics and bureaucrats, tasked with monitoring heresy, enforcing orthodoxy, and keeping Venice aligned with the Church, but always carefully navigating the city's independent spirit. You feel the tension. Religion, politics, and commerce entwined in delicate balance. Historians still argue whether the Venetian Inquisition was harsher or more pragmatic than other European inquisitions. Some claim it served as a tool of oppression. Others argue it functioned as a stabilizing force, ensuring that Venice's unique blend of commerce, culture, and faith remained harmonious. You imagine the inquisitors sifting through reports, interrogating witnesses, and quietly shaping the behavior of nobles, merchants, and citizens alike. Imagine the city as a stage. Markets, canals, and palaces thrive above, while the inquisitor's subtle presence hums below. Quirky details emerge. Some inquisitors kept detailed diaries of odd superstitions or popular rumors, while others were said to deploy secret messengers who carried inquiries disguised as mundane letters. The office operates almost like a shadow government, invisible yet omnipresent. Despite its darker undertones, the Venetian Inquisition is also a testament to Venice's precision. The Republic wields power not just through armies or wealth, but through subtle systems that maintain order, control information, and guide morality, blending piety with pragmatism. And as you drift along the quiet canals, the office fades into the calm of evening. You sense that Venice, like the lagoon itself, thrives through balance, faith and law, shadow and light, authority and independence, all coexisting quietly beneath the city's shimmering surface. The lagoon's gentle waves fade as your imagination carries you out into the wide, open sea. You feel the salty wind whip around you, the horizon stretching endlessly, and you are aboard a Venetian galley, oars cutting through deep blue waters. The year is 1571, and Venice faces a formidable foe, the Ottoman Empire. The stakes could not be higher. Trade, territory, and the very pride of the Republic are on the line, and the battle that awaits will echo through history. The Battle of Lepanto. Picture the Venetian fleet, vast and meticulously arranged, glimmering under the rising sun. Soldiers and sailors brace themselves, their armor and weapons polished, their nerves taut. Across the waves, the Ottoman fleet mirrors this precision, each galley a harbinger of challenge, each commander a test of Venetian skill. You feel the tension, the weight of centuries of rivalry between East and West, trade and territory, ambition and survival. Historians still debate whether the Christian coalition's victory was inevitable or miraculous, but from your vantage, the coordination and courage of Venice's navy are undeniable. The arsenal's training, the disciplined rowers, and the tactical genius of Venetian commanders turn the tide against the Ottoman galleys. The clash is violent. Oars splinter, sails catch fire, and the thunder of cannon echoes across the water. Imagine the chaos up close. Soldiers grappling, swords clashing, and cries of battle mixing with the roar of waves. Yet, amidst the turmoil, Venice's precision and planning shine. Commanders signal through flags and horns, reinforcements arrive at critical moments, and discipline holds even as the sea becomes a battlefield of smoke, fire, and relentless motion. Quirky details emerge. Some galleys had small chapels aboard, sailors praying mid-battle. Others carried exotic animals to impress allies or intimidate foes. You feel the mixture of ritual, superstition, and raw strategy that marks Venice's approach to war. Careful, imaginative, and determined. By the end, victory is won. The Ottoman fleet is broken, Venice's influence secured, and the Mediterranean balance of power shifts. The Republic's navy has proven that despite centuries of changing empires, Venice still commands respect and fear on the seas. As you drift with the receding echoes of cannon fire, you sense both triumph and fragility. Lepanto is glorious, yet history moves forward, and Venice, like all great powers, must adapt, innovate, and endure. The lagoon's calm waters welcome you back, a reminder that even after storms, the city survives. ever graceful, ever resilient. The lagoon stretches quietly before you, shimmering under a late afternoon sun, as your imagination drifts into the 17th century. Venice, once the unrivaled queen of the Mediterranean, now senses that the world itself is shifting. The oceans grow larger in ambition, distant empires rise and fall, and trade routes extend far beyond the Adriatic. You feel the weight of change in every ripple of water, every passing galley, every whispered council meeting in gilded halls. Step into the Doge's study. Maps cover the walls, charts drawn meticulously to track distant lands, the Americas, Africa's coasts, Asia's markets. Venice realizes that while it once commanded the East through the Stato da Mar, new powers like Spain, Portugal, and the Dutch now navigate oceans in ways Venice cannot always follow. Historians still argue whether Venice foresaw its gradual decline or clung too stubbornly to old maritime roots, but from here you sense a subtle shift, pride tempered with pragmatism. Imagine the bustling Rialto market, now tinged with new anxieties. Spices, silks, and precious metals still flow, but increasingly through competitors' ships. Venetian merchants innovate, adapting contracts and trade networks. Yet there is an undercurrent of tension. The Republic's ships are fast, well-trained, and formidable, but the map of the world grows wider, more complex, and less controllable. You drift past the arsenal, imagining workers hammering and assembling ships with the same precision as always. Yet even here, innovation cannot fully counter the tectonic shifts in global trade and politics. Venice's centuries of dominance face the slow, inevitable reality. The center of power moves beyond the Adriatic, the Mediterranean, and even Europe itself. Quirky details surface. Venetian sailors whisper about distant lands, where maps show rivers of gold or mountains of spices, blending fantasy and ambition. The city debates its future quietly, balancing diplomacy, commerce, and culture, knowing that adaptation will determine survival. As the evening settles, you sense a melancholic beauty. Venice is neither defeated nor diminished. It is entering a new phase, a graceful transition from empire to legacy. The waters of the lagoon ripple softly, reminding you that while the currents of history change, Venice's spirit, its elegance, ingenuity, and resilience endures. The lagoon glows under a warm, golden light, as if the city itself is settling into a gentle, reflective slumber. You drift along the Grand Canal, imagining Venice in its later centuries, when her power begins to wane, but her beauty and influence remain unmatched. Palaces shimmer in the sun, bridges cast delicate shadows on calm waters, and gondolas glide silently as if performing a ritual of continuity. This is the long, gilded sunset of Venice, a period of elegance, grace, and quiet transformation. Step into a palace along the canal. Curtains flutter in the breeze, frescoes shine under soft sunlight, and nobles sip wine, discussing politics, art, and commerce. The Republic may no longer control every port in the Mediterranean, yet she still commands admiration, shaping culture, diplomacy, and taste. Historians still debate whether Venice's decline was inevitable or overstated, but you sense it is less a collapse than a graceful pivot, a city adapting to new realities while preserving its grandeur. Imagine the festivals, masked balls, and serenades that continue to define Venetian life. Music spills from balconies, artists paint opulent scenes, and merchants maintain trade networks, smaller but still significant. Venice teaches the world that influence is not always tied to conquest. Sometimes it lives in beauty, ceremony, and ideas. quirky details appear. Wealthy patricians experiment with exotic plants in gardens, gondoliers perfect tricks and clever maneuvers for entertainment, and merchants preserve centuries-old contracts, some written in handwriting so elaborate it seems decorative rather than practical. The city hums with life, yet there is a sense of reflection, as though Venice knows her greatest battles are behind her, leaving only elegance and strategy as her companions. You drift past the lagoon at dusk, golden light fading into soft pinks and purples. The shadows of bell towers stretch across water. The canals reflect the sky, and Venice, proud yet contemplative, seems to whisper her stories to anyone willing to listen. This is a city that has mastered seas and lands, commerce and culture, war and diplomacy. And as you drift along, lulled by the rhythm of lapping water, you sense the beauty of Venice's long, gilded sunset. A city poised between memory and eternity, teaching that even as the world changes course, grace and ingenuity endure. The lagoon lies calm beneath a pale, quiet sky as your imagination drifts to Venice at a turning point. A moment when centuries of pride, power, and maritime dominance face an unavoidable reality. You can feel the tension in the air, a mixture of resignation, reflection, and quiet dignity. The city that once commanded galleys across the Mediterranean, dominated trade, and held sway over distant ports must now acknowledge the limits of empire. Picture diplomats walking across polished floors of grand palaces, petitions in hand, faces serious yet measured. Venice negotiates, bargains, and surrenders not with fear, but with careful calculation. It is a final bow, an acknowledgement of shifting powers in Europe and the world, rising empires, new trade routes, and the relentless march of time. Historians still debate whether this surrender is a moment of loss or a strategic pivot, but you sense that the Republic carries it with elegance, choosing survival over ruin. Imagine the canals reflecting muted sunlight as the city adjusts. Ships no longer sail to distant ports with the same dominance, but Venice continues to thrive culturally and socially. Its palaces, churches, and public squares remain centers of art, music, and learning. Quirky details emerge. Even during these political concessions, Venetian nobles maintain their elaborate pageantry, masked balls, and private gardens, a city refusing to give up its soul. You feel the paradox. Venice's power is constrained, yet its influence endures in subtle ways. Trade, diplomacy, and culture continue to ripple outward, reaching distant courts and merchants. The city negotiates a graceful exit from dominance, demonstrating that legacy and resilience often outlast raw conquest. As you drift through quiet canals, you realize that the final surrender is not a defeat of spirit, but a testament to adaptability. Venice teaches the world that empires may fall, but wisdom, foresight, and culture can preserve identity. The city moves forward, humble in power, but unwavering in grace, a beacon of endurance amidst change. The lagoon is calm and golden as your imagination drifts into the present, where Venice, though no longer an empire, carries centuries of history in every stone and ripple. You walk through the city as it exists today, the scent of salt water and pastries mingling in the air, gondolas gliding past tourists who snap pictures unaware of the deeper stories beneath their feet. The Lion of St. Mark, ever watchful, appears on flags, fountains, and palaces, a silent sentinel of an empire that once stretched across the Mediterranean. Picture yourself standing on the Rialto Bridge. The Grand Canal curves beneath you, flanked by buildings that shimmer with centuries of trade, artistry, and ingenuity. every corner tells a story. The power of merchants, the boldness of explorers, the resilience of a city shaped by water. Even in the bustling present, echoes of Venice's past pulse through the city. Historians still debate how much of the modern city preserves the authentic essence of its empire versus a carefully curated image for visitors. But standing here, you feel a continuity that transcends debate. Imagine stepping into a quiet calle, away from crowds, where the gentle lapping of water against stone walls is the only sound. Gondoliers navigate skillfully, weaving a rhythm honed over centuries. Palaces bear frescoes and inscriptions that speak of wealth, diplomacy, and ambition. Quirky details appear, small plaques marking historical events, discreet statues honoring forgotten governors, even hidden doors once used for secret trade or safe passage. You sense the layers of history waiting to be discovered. Walking past the Doge's Palace in San Marco, you notice how Venice's spirit has endured. Its legacy is not in empires or armies, but in beauty, culture, and resilience. The canals, bridges, and palaces form a living museum, a city that remembers itself even as the world moves on. And as the sun sets, casting a warm glow over the lagoon, you realize that visiting Venice today is like walking through a dream woven from centuries of ambition, trade, art, and diplomacy. The Lion of St. Mark watches silently, a reminder that Venice's story, its ingenuity, elegance, and courage, continues to inspire, long after her fleets have sailed and her banners have flown across distant seas. The lagoon stretches out before you, calm and luminous under the soft glow of evening. You drift gently through Venice's quiet canals, letting the city's centuries of stories wash over you like a slow, soothing tide. Palaces and bridges gleam faintly in the fading light. Gondolas glide silently, and the echoes of merchants, explorers, and soldiers seem to linger in the air, a gentle hum beneath the rhythm of water. You feel the layers of history beneath your feet, the rise of empires, the trade of silk and spices, the clash of fleets at Lepanto, and the subtle diplomacy of condottieri. Each moment, each event, blends into the next, forming a rich tapestry that is Venice, elegant, resilient, and endlessly fascinating. Even the quieter chapters, the Venetian Inquisition, the turn to the mainland, the city's graceful surrender, carry lessons of patience, wisdom, and adaptability. Imagine the reflections in the canals as twilight deepens, lanterns flickering like tiny stars mirrored in water. You hear the gentle slap of waves against stone, the soft creak of gondolas, and you feel a sense of continuity, a city that has endured, adapted, and inspired through centuries of change. Quirky details, hidden gardens, secret tunnels, subtle emblems of the Lion of St. Mark surface in your mind, reminding you that Venice is a city of stories, both grand and intimate. And as your eyelids grow heavy, you realize that Venice's legacy is not only in empires or battles, but in beauty, culture, and spirit. The city whispers to you through every canal and courtyard that elegance, ingenuity, and courage endure even when the world changes. Now, breathe deeply, let the lagoon cradle your thoughts, and allow the stories of Venice to lull you into a gentle, peaceful sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.